Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
with your host, certified cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
This month's guest is Dan Coonan.
So sit back,
Pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
Welcome to Books and Brews,
number 53, with our guest,
Dan Coonan.
Yeah, so I would ask, how's your month been? But you were there, I was there.
I think your month has been a little more wicked than mine.
My month has been very interesting. We managed to make a cross-country move. Within days of me having surgery and be told I really shouldn't leave the state, and staying in the state was not a great option either. So we have managed, thanks to some really wonderful doctors, to switch my care halfway across the country. And we got the rabbits here, we got the tractor here, we got
all kinds of things here, including ourselves.
Yeah, including ourselves, including the moving trucks. It was quite the adventure because we had to put off the move by a week, and then we just couldn't put it off anymore. At a certain point, my son had taken off with the rabbits. It's like, we've got 14 rabbits sitting in Tennessee. We can't leave them to starve to death. We got to go. So, yeah, what's been the most interesting part of the month to you, Chris?
Well, moving and getting the logistics of all of that going. I did manage to read a couple of books this month.
What
I was
books did you
wondering,
read?
well, I read one, a Lee Child book on Jack Reacher, one of my potato chip novels that I love. You bet you can't read just one.
Right.
And then there was also a Nelson DeMille book that I read as well. And his, I find to be very good, very deep, from the amount of research he does, especially worldwide. So how about yourself? What books have you read?
Well, this will come as a huge surprise, but I have read a book called Presidential Spirits by Dan Coonan. And I had hoped to read more Presidential Spirits. But at that point, I was feeling pretty good from the first surgery. So I got deep into packing, and I think I accidentally packed both your books. And then I got hit with the second surgery, surprise, and had lots of time on my hands to read, but too late. All my books were packed. So I did read a very interesting book called Finding Moosewood, Finding God. And unfortunately, I forgot to write down the author's name, but it was somebody who was quite well known as a journalist in his day, very much, secular atheist. And he and his wife, for reasons they really couldn't explain themselves, went and bought this little tiny island, or to be more exact, half of a little tiny island off the coast of Maine, I believe it was, and they named it Moosewood. And so I'm only about halfway through, but it's detailing how they go from living this very kind of wealthy, elite Hollywood lifestyle to living in this little cabin with no electricity, no running water, and how they deal with the people of this little town in Maine, not really wanting them there at first, and how they win them over, things like that. So it is a very interesting book.
Very good. Can you tell us more about our guest this month, Laura?
We have Dan Coonan this month, and we actually booked Dan many months ago. I believe it was it on the Historical Writers Facebook page that I put out a notice?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think it was. So it was really interesting seeing the variety of books that fell under historical fiction. I mean, last month we did Cleopatra with Karen Essex, backing up to, remind me of the date, 200s BC, 400s BC.
Yes,
Oh, geez.
220 BC.
I'm sorry, Karen. It wasn't 220 BC. That's Kendall Price's book that is not yet written. I know, because I'm co-writing it and I haven't finished. So anyway, this month we have Dan Coonan, and we are taking a jump, more than 2,000 years into the future to kind of the present day, present centuries. Dan Coonan has worn many hats through the years: conference commissioner, athletic director, CEO, attorney, novelist, senior congressional campaign advisor, fundraiser. I need to take a breath. Nonprofit chairman of the board, college adjunct, professor, political essayist, youth sports coach, bartender, which is fitting for the book, batting practice pitcher, wedding officiant, doc talk facilitator. What exactly is that, by the way?
So for all our lives, we go to a lake, Lake Almanor in Northern California, and we as my extended family, we just hang out on the dock, and we play music and we mix drinks. So I figured that might be my most important role, actually.
There you go. Yeah.
Sometimes what we do with family is, probably often it is. It lasts for generations.
Right.
And so I'll finish up with the last two hats: devoted husband and father. His books are Presidential Spirits, part history lesson. Oops, I enunciated. I did that wrong. Part history lesson, part magical realism. These well-researched books imagine conversations of all 45 presidents in a saloon stocked with any drink you want, located above the private quarters of the White House and accessible only to presidents and a few colorful wait staff through a secret portal. So, I have so many questions about this. We're not going to get through even half of them.
That's all right. I'm looking forward to it.
That's great. What do we have for our first cocktail, Chris?
Well, I figured, especially based on the first reading and based on these illustrious surroundings, in the book and everything like that, that we had to start with the most illustrious of cocktails, which is a Manhattan. And so the apocryphal story, about this is that it was invented at a party in 1874 by Jenny Jerome, also known as Lady Randolph Churchill, Winston Churchill's mother. The story is apocryphal because she was actually home pregnant with Winnie at the time. And so it's highly unlikely she actually invented it, but it does go back at least to the 1880s. And, bespeaks leather, cigars, subdued lighting, fireplaces, and the illustrious gentlemen and ladies that might inhabit rooms at this time in salons. So I have the idea of being able to create a Manhattan here. We're going to start off with rye whiskey. Now, interestingly enough, all Canadian whiskey is envisioned as rye whiskey, even though it can have as little as 0% rye in it. And so that's kind of interesting all by itself. Whereas American rye whiskey has to have at least 51% rye in it to be considered rye whiskey. And I was first thinking of trying to make this with my favorite rye, which is Whistle Pig, made by Alberta Distillers, but the price of it we found locally was a little excessive. So, we went with the Canadian whiskey instead, and going from there. So we start with a couple ounces of rye. We also have our wonderful sweet vermouth. So we'll throw in a little bit of that. It's a little too much. I'll put that back. And we have some Angostura bitters in order to provide a little bit of a nice contrast to the sweetness of the vermouth and the rye.
That's bitter.
Indeed, it would be. Yeah, accidentally splashed her. We'll throw in some wonderful ice. Take that up with my shaker glass, just a little bit.
Love it.
It looks like maybe we haven't found the top of the shaker and unpacking yet.
Gotta improvise.
Right. We're improvising.
Normally, I would strain this with my wonderful strainer, but in the move, we haven't figured out how to find that yet. So
you got a nice glass for that too.
Yeah, we have found the important things: the glasses and the alcohol.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And we're going to throw a maraschino cherry in there.
Throw in a second.
Love it.
Please.
Yes, indeed.
And you've got a great setting for that drink too, by the way.
So, remind me what this drink is.
A Manhattan.
A Manhattan. Okay, so Chris is going to have the first drink.
Absolutely wonderful.
Turned out great. Of course it did.
I'm not sure I've ever had Manhattan. It's kind of bitter, but I do like that.
Yes, it's wonderfully rich, just like the tone of the first reading, I believe,
right.
in terms of the room that it's in. So,
and I can easily imagine that as you described it and as you describe the room.
Right. Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember offhand. I know your first reading is his first night, so I'm assuming you described the room. So go ahead, first.
So so this is and again the premise: a modern president who finds that he can access a saloon in the White House, in the third floor of the White House, where he meets every one of his predecessors, and he can continue to go there during his presidency. And they all want him and the country to be successful, by the way, unlike what he sees in Washington, where with the polarization and everyone seemingly rooting against.
Wait, the politicization in Washington?
Yeah. Imagine that.
Now I know you write fiction. It's all peace and love, sir.
So this is, and he didn't know about this. So this is when he first stumbles upon that. So here we go. It's from Presidential Spirits, pages 48 and 49. The door was very heavy, much more so than it appeared. It opened inward, and I had to push hard to get it to budge. Even then, it opened slowly. Immediately, I was overcome with the smell of cigar smoke permeating the air. The distinct aroma, however, was mild compared to the incredible sight before me. I found myself inexplicably gazing inside a stunning, well-appointed, classic period bar room. As a guy who appreciates a great pub, or at least someone who used to, this was a sight to behold. It struck me as something out of another century altogether, and neither of the ones I had occupied. My eyes fixated on the bar itself, which was massive. It appeared to be mahogany or something equally elegant, and spanned a good 50 feet end to end. The grand back bar, which proudly displayed rows of the finest spirits, extended all the way up to a lofty tin-tile ceiling. Vintage rolling library ladders provided the bartenders access all the way to the top. Dimly lit gas lamps interspersed throughout the large room set the atmosphere, and the smoke billowing from the many active cigars hung in the air, obscuring the sights before me like the fog on a San Francisco summer night. Large booths with green leather banquets and oaken tables lined two of the walls, with much larger oak tables sprinkled throughout the center of the room for bigger gatherings of men. The tavern's patrons appeared to be mostly, if not exclusively, men, and there seemed to be a dress code. Some looked to be dressed in period costumes for some reason. On a small stage in the corner, a jazz singer was perched atop a bar stool, superbly belting out the blues, backed by an ensemble band that would have been right at home on Bourbon Street. Indeed, this bar had more swagger than any I'd ever entered, and I hadn't even ordered a drink. I wondered what the heck was going on. This was already the most unlikely and extraordinary day of my life, even before I'd happened upon this spectacular find. Maybe I was dead, or perhaps I was dreaming, or hallucinating. Should I summon the Secret Service, consult a psychiatrist, quietly return to the residence, and never breathe a word of this to anyone as long as I live? I decided to order a drink. I meandered through the large crowded room, making my way to the bar. It was the first time in over 2 months that I had been able to enter a crowd of strangers of any kind without the Secret Service tagging along. It was a little bit freeing. There appeared to be about 50 or so men clearly delighting in the party, with several young waitresses and bartenders there to assist in that effort. The servers donned impeccable formal attire that smartly complemented the high-end decor. The men sported fitted white long-sleeve button-down shirts, black bow ties, and slim black flat front trousers, and shoes that appeared for all the world as if they were purchased that very day. The women wore narrow black pencil skirts and tight white knit shirts with deep scoop necks. While this impressive group of ladies would have stood out in any crowd, they particularly cut quite a contrast amidst the aging male patrons. I walked past a gentleman who was the spitting image of Ronald Reagan and sounded a lot like him too. He was deep in conversation with an old guy wearing knee breeches and white stockings. A seemingly serious conversation with an old guy wearing knee breeches and stockings. I must be losing my mind, I thought. What is this place? All right. So that's his first night where he's stumbling upon it.
I didn't get my mute turned off quick enough. One of the things that really jumped out to me about this, after many, many years of writing, of studying writing, even of doing some teaching of writing, We always hear that there are 3 basic plots, 7 basic plots, 36 storylines are the only ones ever told. Do you think that this one fits into any of those?
Well, I don't think so. And when you do this, and so I'd never written a novel before. I'd wanted to for all my since 6th grade. And as I started writing, I started looking and finding what you're talking about. More of the art and craft of stories about the art and craft of writing and how it all fits into a formula of one or the other. And then people start telling you get comps. And so when you're seeking a publisher and when you're seeking an agent, find other novels that are very similar, so so they'll know what to expect. There aren't necessarily. It's historical fiction, kind of, but we're not going back to another place in time. And
right.
And it's magical realism, kind of, or fantasy, but most fantasy is dragons and so I didn't find, and I certainly didn't write it to be like anything other than the idea that I had. So I'm not sure that it fits into any of the many that.
Right. That was one of my first thoughts. It just doesn't. So many of these storylines are, like the Oedipus story, for example, that are told over and over again. The Romeo and Juliet sort of story. I guess the Star-Crossed Lovers is what that one's called. This doesn't fit in any, as far as I know. So that really struck me. I don't think I've ever read a book before that just doesn't fit. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
You've created a whole new storyline that nobody else has done, which leads me to the question: what put this idea in your head, and why the interest in American presidents? What brought that up?
Well, I've always been fascinated with them, and I mean, I've got I'm in front of one of my bookshelves here that has mostly presidential biographies, and they're all starting with Washington, and so I've always been fascinated by that, and so I've read a ton about it, so I know a little bit about it, but and I've always wanted to write a novel, and I have a whole file full of potential novel plots, but when we went to my wife for her 50th birthday wanted to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame, of all places, and driving back with the family, everybody was asleep, and I was like thinking big. I just started writing another novel that was a little more of a traditional novel, so to speak. But the idea popped in my head. I was thinking about baseball and Field of Dreams, and I love the concept of Field of Dreams, the movie, and the book, by the way.
You mentioned it in your novel. Yeah,
exactly. And the movie Midnight in Paris. I love the movie Midnight in Paris, and they're both kind of the same. Where somebody can go. Well, in Field of Dreams, these players come back from the past and they interact with people in the present, and maybe it's kind of the reverse in Midnight in Paris, where an author in Paris today goes back in time in Paris in the 20s with Hemingway and Gertrude Stein and people like that, and I just love that concept, and so I was thinking about that as I was driving home, and I thought, there should be an American history version of that, or a political version of that, and similarly, one of those many potential novels that I had in my file was about a modern president who would be moderate and would struggle. I mean, people on both sides would be kind of okay with him, but he would struggle amidst our polarization. And I kind of took that and pieced it into the Field of Dreams, Midnight in Paris concept. And when it occurred to me, I thought, oh, I would love to write something like that, and so instantly I wanted to do it. But then I wondered, had it been done before? I didn't want to seem like I was copying somebody. I thought it was okay to kind of parody that or borrow the concept generally from Field of Dreams and Midnight in Paris, because this was sufficiently different. And I looked and I didn't find anything, and I just got more excited. And I wondered, I hoped that I could have that I would have the ability to write it. But I certainly had the knowledge of with all the reading I've done over the course of 35 years of American history, and I would say humbly, the equivalent of a degree of some sort.
Right.
And I also have a ton of experience in bars and saloons, and my creative writing teacher.
I thought you were going to say I have a ton of experience in politics.
Well,
No,
I
I
ran
have
a
experience drinking.
Do you find your background as an attorney?
Years and years ago, but no. What helped me more in this was having been in a saloon or two in my day, and my creative writing teacher at Notre Dame. I took a creative writing course. It wasn't my major, but I took from a novelist and a screenwriter, and she'd always say, "Write what you know." So I know a little bit about saloons. So anyhow, so I figured I would create like my favorite bar ever for this, and I'd pluck all these wonderful characters from American history into
and
it.
I think it's a great backdrop and a great sort of foil to this very, very serious topic of politics today and in the past. And here you've got all these guys drinking. I wanted to know, as I read, it took me reading your website, your page, your author page, but I realized Danny McFadden is a not so thinly veiled you. It's your
do you think? No, I've never heard that. That's crazy. No.
Oh no, you admit your mother's maiden name. You're not trying.
I did. Oh, good knowledge there. I took my mom's maiden name. Yes, it's written in first person. But I just kind of, I share the political view of why can't we all just get together? We're better than this. We're better than this, aren't we? And writing it first person, I just figured I would have more fun. And oh my God, everyone who I've ever known, worked with, played on a team with, went to school with, they all have read this. It's
right.
It's uncanny. I never imagined that everyone I ever touched in life would read a book that I would write. And almost to a person, they say, "Oh my God, it was just like spending time with you again," or with people I hadn't seen in decades.
My question was, what is the advantage of making this basically you rather than just creating a completely fictitious president?
Well, it was fun.
Okay.
And maybe that means I'm a narcissist or who knows, but no. I just kind of viewed all of this. Okay, well, how would I react? As ludicrous as it is to think that I would be president, and that as president I would be able to interact with all these folks. It was a great fantasy. It was. It was because I really immersed myself in this thing, and I felt like I was talking to Thomas Jefferson and James Madison when I'm asking them about Paris. And the great thing is, I could ask. I in the saloon, and I do it in the second novel even more than the first, but just the greatest questions that I could think of. What would I want to know? From what would I want to, or FDR? Actually, FDR is coming up in one of our discussions or one of our readings. But what or like another one that I thought of was asking Grant about Robert E. Lee. And I find for my readers, those seem to be, especially the real history buffs, those seem to be the portions of my book that they like the most. In the first one I had Obama, I thought, okay, what would Obama ask Lincoln? I knew, and I thought, Obama would probably ask him about Frederick Douglass. And so I did that, and then I went back and saw things that Lincoln actually said about Frederick Douglass to compose the answer. I wasn't just making things up for president. But yeah, I guess it was easy. It was, well, I'm writing other things, and it doesn't mean I can't write for other characters, and many of the characters in the Saloon, the wait staff, and the other people in the White House, I'm writing for other folks. But I guess it's easy. I think it's easy to write yourself.
Right. Well, and when you know so much about the subject, about the presidents, about yourself, obviously, we do need to go on to cocktail number 2.
So if I, had to go again based on the readings and everything like that with the favorite foil to a Manhattan, which would be, of course, the old fashioned, and so named, of course, for the idea of the first perhaps widely known cocktail ever, and people ordering the cocktail the old fashioned way, and so there are some differences, of course, between a Manhattan and an old fashioned. You may have noticed that the Manhattan was served in a stem glass like a martini, and an old fashioned is served in a lowball glass like this. And an old fashioned is seasoned with sweetened with simple syrup, whereas a Manhattan is sweetened with vermouth. And so, you have a couple of different differences as we go through. Unlike James Bond, this cocktail is stirred, not shaken. So we start with a teaspoon of water and some simple syrup. And as I'm making this, I have to ask, what is your favorite president out of all the ones that you've, researching?
So, maybe it'd be hard not to go with Washington. And maybe it's cliche to say that, although the cliche may be Lincoln. But just for all that he did to bring, not only did he defeat the greatest military in the world with a ragtag group of farmers and shopkeepers and you name it, but he might be the only one that could have served as president and held that together as well in the first years. So I think it would be hard for me not to go with him. But in general, I like the great orators, those with soaring rhetoric about America's place in the world, like Jefferson and FDR, Reagan, Obama, those that could really speak and describe very eloquently, John Kennedy, America's role on the world stage. And so that's how I would answer that, I think.
Very nice. Well, and with the old fashioned, we're completing it. We've had some simple syrup, some water. We threw in some Peychaud's bitters with this, a cup of ice, and a jigger of bourbon, as the whiskey of choice, if you will. We're going to throw a maraschino cherry and a little slice of orange on top of some ice. And again, stirred, not shaken so much. And we come to the old fashioned.
Cheers.
Awesome. Love it.
So we are ready for reading number 2 to go with the old fashioned.
Okay. And let me see. And I neglected to mention Teddy Roosevelt. He might have been the most fun to write about, too.
I bet.
And oh my God, I just, what a character. And so, so this is a scene from toward the end of the book, as McFadden, the president, is in the saloon, but he knows that his presidency is coming to an end. So that's setting the stage here. Herbert Hoover had been waiting behind Tyler for a chance to speak with me. Be glad you're leaving on your own terms and won't have an election defeat to recover from and make you bitter like I did, said Hoover. My advice to you is to go back to Northern California. We did. Stanford will take you in. So will the Bohemian Club. My camp there, the Caveman, would love to have you. Thank you so much, sir. But I'm not so sure I'm welcome there any longer. I gave a lakeside talk recently and told them they needed to admit women. Good God, fella, what on earth possessed you to do that? I'm a bit more progressive than you, sir, but I did enjoy the Bohemian Grove. I stayed with a group of rather colorful characters at a camp called the Pink Onion and thoroughly enjoyed that. And I met Jimmy Buffett. Is he a Republican politician? No, more like a philosopher, but I'd love to have him to work with in the House or the Senate if he was. He'd be much better than most of the characters currently there. Anyway, I really appreciate your well wishes, sir. The band continued to play, and the drinks flowed for the crowd of men well into the night. Maybe this was the Bohemian Grove. The similarities were striking. I heard Ginger yell, "Last call for presidential spirits." This was the latest I had ever been in the saloon. Much of the room bellied up to the bar for another, but I figured enough was enough. I said my goodbyes. As I was making my way to the exit, someone grabbed me from behind. I whirled around to see who it was, Teddy Roosevelt. "You are a splendid addition to this illustrious body, McFadden," TR declared. "That may just be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me, sir," I replied. "Choose your next pursuits wisely," he advised. Then with his voice steadily rising, he added, "Remember, a soft, easy life is not worth living. It impairs the fiber of the brain and heart and muscle. Dare to be great, McFadden. Greatness is the fruit of toil and sacrifice and high courage. Seek a life of action, of strenuous performance of duty. Let us live in the harness, striving mightily. Let us rather run the risk of wearing out than rusting out." That was priceless. He was a true caricature of himself. Everything I would have imagined. In today's world, he'd be the greatest motivational public speaker we know, with millions of YouTube subscribers. I looked him right in the eye, seeking to match his passion pound for pound, and roared right back at him. "I vow to live the rest of my life in that harness, sir." A moment later, I added, "I've never been in a harness before, but it will soon become a core part of my being." God, I love this bar. This experience alone is worth all the headaches of the presidency. As I walked away, I heard Ginger yell one more time, "Drink 'em up, you presidents, now or never, and you can't take 'em with you. Don't make me go all Carrie Nation on you."
Fantastic. I remember Carrie Nation from deep in my past, but I don't remember exactly what she did. I was going to look her up today and I forgot. So give a quick reminder.
So she was some would call her she was the most vocal prohibition supporter, and she would go around and destroy bars. She would go in. In fact, I've been at the Manger Bar in San Antonio, where Teddy Roosevelt rounded up his Rough Riders to go storm San Juan Hill, and she went into that bar with a big hatchet and busted up the bar, and they still have you can still see the piece that she busted out of it, but she would do that, and so she was. Some would, like I said, some would call her a terrorist. She was making an example.
She was not shy in her opinions, huh?
Very passionate lady. Yes.
As you were reading this, I remembered I had a really neat experience. Are you familiar with what was called the Winter White House of Coolidge and one of the Roosevelts? What was it called? You know of that? Mm-hmm. Have you by any chance been there?
I have not. No.
Okay, it's not open to the public, but I just so happen to know someone who was working with the owner of it, he's just a private citizen, and he goes around and he buys up properties because he can, and this is one of them. And so this friend of mine took me through this. Is it called the Winter or the Summer White House? It's in like Hayward, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a summer White House, right?
That makes more sense. Nobody would go to Wisconsin in winter.
No, that's
right. That's like going to Duluth in the winter.
Mostly the Winter White House, I think, refers to San Clemente and Nixon.
Right. Yeah. So this was, and it was a really neat experience because the house is just sitting there empty, but things were left behind. And so, for instance, when he took me through this house, I got to see the head of bison. That one of the, I forget which Roosevelt it was that stayed there, but this big head of a bison is just laying there on the table.
I think it was Teddy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And FDR went down to Warm Springs, Georgia, all the time.
Yeah, it was a really neat experience that I've got some neat pictures of. Now, one thing I wanted to ask in the last section, and this is a huge question, so I couldn't ask it at the end. Your entire book is based on this idea that, as you say, we can do better than this. I'm looking around at the things going on today. You wrote this book, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, 2017 is when I
Yeah,
started.
I think things have gotten much more divisive, much more schismed since then, if that's
Yeah.
the word it is now, because I used it. Do you think at this point that we can come together? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. So yeah, one of the themes of the book, we're better than this. And there are times when I wonder if we are. But things happen, and I continue, and I'm an optimist. I continue to believe that there is a way out. I wrote this book hoping that I could play a role. I mean, I didn't have an outsized view. I mean, and it's done great. 5,000 people or so on the first one have read it. I wanted to do something. I think the right leader might be able to unite the country still. I still believe that. And I was in both of the books. I kind of map out a path where that might be able to happen. And so I'm not saying it's easy, and it will take a monumental effort. But I refuse to believe that it can't happen.
To me, one of the problems that stands in the way is I don't believe that everybody wants to come together. I believe that, obviously that takes compromise. It takes working with each other. It takes saying, these people who don't believe what I do, I think they're wrong, but they're not evil. We can talk. And I think a lot of people are beyond that.
Well, I think you raise a good point when you say they're not evil. And I think at our extremes, we view the other side as evil. And if we could try to understand why they believe what they believe, on both and in the middle, and not just say, oh, they're despicable, they're full of hate, they're racist, or they're, you name it, and which with both sides are claiming about the other. We all start from the same position in this country and grow to a point where now, but if we could just understand that more, I think that's a good starting point. But also our political system has shut out the middle, the middle that most feels that we could be united. And they don't have a voice because they've abandoned the two parties, and that middle is now far exceeds what either of the two parties are. The middle people who view
about 45%.
Yeah. I do it. I cite that stat in both books several times because it dwarfs what either the other two parties have. And so anyhow, but that is why I wrote the book, to express how I think it might be able to happen and to try to help motivate something like that.
So one of my questions then would be, how would you convince people that, maybe instead of calling names, you should talk? And I say this because, I'll go on social media, I'll go on Twitter or whatever, and, say, here's this, why I believe what I believe. I get called names, and I say, can we talk about it instead of calling names? And I usually get called another name.
Yeah.
So
well,
how do you convince people?
And I think, I'm sorry. I don't think Twitter helps because and Twitter is just a sliver of the country, but it's voracious. The venom that is spewed on that platform. It's incredible. So I don't think that's a good representation. However, that does make it worse. Unquestionably, it makes it worse. And I think that one of the only ways, again, for leaders to emerge that are that their whole, it almost has to be their whole platform is unity as opposed to division. And I think it's hard to think of that person starting with the White House. I think maybe it's going to start. I mean, the crazy thing in so many races last in the midterms, you had the most liberal versus the most MAGA, and in both cases there were more moderates that lost in the primaries on either side that would have been palatable, that easily would have won the election. And so I think it might start with some of those races with an independent and then many independents. And that's kind of how things proceeded in my books with the independent group getting a foothold and a beachhead in the Senate and the House. I mean, you look at, I don't want to go too long, but you look at some of the most contentious issues, like picking the speaker last year, 2 years ago, when McCarthy, how many votes it took to get McCarthy. If the Democrats had just said, hey, instead of just we're in the minority, so you guys figure this out, and the Republicans tried to get together, and it took forever. If people in the middle had decided, a ton of Democrats and a ton of Republicans who had got together, they could have picked a moderate speaker, and that person would be able to pass legislation that wasn't just way over here or way over there or redo what the last Congress did or what. I think it might start there as opposed to starting with the presidency, perhaps.
I have one last question on a lighter topic. We were talking just before we actually started recording about your research into presidential drinks.
Right. Correct. So we have, and so everything in the book. So I have, chapters about baseball and about I mean, you name it, and about music, and I mean, everything that's in there is researched. So when the presidents are talking about whatever subject it is, books, it's what they've actually said, and drinking is a piece of that too. So this is a book that I had before I even had the concept to write my novels, and this is by Mark Will Weber, who I've now gotten to know, and he endorsed both my books. But
cool.
he is the expert on presidential drinking. And this is the complete history of presidential drinking, and it's called Mint Juleps with Teddy Roosevelt, and it goes president by president and what they drank, and then he did a Republican version and a Democratic version.
So that's so funny. I wish we had like 3 hours. I would ask you to really delve into that.
Right. Yeah. But this isn't the only, but this is, to me, is just like the Bible for my book in terms of, because everything they order in that saloon, they ordered in real life. So I made it, it was important to me to do that. But there's other sources of that too. Of what they drank, but anyhow, that's the main one.
We are ready for cocktail number 3.
So in looking at what you said in the second reading, and then also moving forward with FDR and things like that, I'm reminded of a Bohemian lifestyle, and so I thought of this Bohemian cocktail, which is a bit perhaps more recent in terms of its innovation, but certainly harkens back to a different age. And so here we have a cocktail that starts with some gin, and I have sorry, say again.
A good place to start.
Yes, indeed. Every drink should start with gin if it doesn't already start with bourbon or something like that. So I have a Solveig gin here, which is brewed way up north in Minnesota, despite its French name. So we start with a jigger of that. We then proceed, one of my favorite liqueurs and mixers, which is an elderflower liqueur, or Saint Germain, and we put in, after the ounce and a half of gin, we put in about an ounce of this. We then have some grapefruit juice to go with that, and we finish the cocktail itself with a bit of Peychaud's bitters. But I do a little bit more with the cocktail, so I'll get into Peychaud's. One of the options of this cocktail is to finish it with one of my favorite things, which is a dry shake. And, so you have a nice egg white with a little bit of the elderflower liqueur also in it. in order to give it a bit of a frothy color. And having raised chickens in Minnesota, the idea of a dry shake was it's something I tried to put into every drink I could.
Right.
And the idea, of course, of a dry shake is that you're doing it without ice. There's also the idea of a reverse shake, where you actually start with the ice and finish dry. But in this case, we will work on the dry shake, which takes a good 15 seconds or so, in order to get the nice whip going.
Uh-huh.
So, I have to ask while I'm shaking away, if your background as an attorney helped you in terms of being enamored of constitutional law and the presidents and all of that and their role in our constitutional republic.
Yeah, absolutely. It all works together. I took extra courses in law school on constitutional law just because I'm just fascinated by it, and
Yep.
That's part of my fascination with Madison involves the Constitution and the whole founders. So the founders play a key role in both of these books, of course, the founders that were presidents, but yeah, no, it helps not only in my understanding of it all, but it's reflected. That's one of the reasons I went to law school, is my fascination with that.
Very, very nice. I'm just about to finish off the drink with its foam color. Here, I put in the ice, of course, to finish the dry shake.
This looks very different from some of the others with egg white that we
Oh,
have.
I like it. Nicely
Yes.
done. The presentation as a bartender, the presentation
Yes.
is
So
almost as important as the taste. And
So let me take my sip of it.
It's the elderflower and grapefruit. It really gives it a very floral and herbal
I really, really like
kind of an
that.
aspect.
yeah.
I'm not supposed to be drinking alcohol, so he'll have to take that and
I
run
love
with it.
that. I love that you are anyway.
Well, I actually did the research, and what it said is alcohol is not really going to affect or hurt anything. It's, if anything, just going to make the antibiotic a little less effective.
Okay. Well,
And
that's a green light if I ever heard one.
that's the only thing I can imagine coming out of the mouth of the man who wrote Presidential Spirits. If you had the hip pain I have had, you would understand why I was motivated to do anything to make sure this antibiotic was as effective as possible.
Right. Yeah. Well.
We're within a week or so of it being done, and believe me,
Good for
he's
you.
going to make me 5 or 6 of these.
Yeah. You're with the right guy there.
I am indeed.
In the right location. That's a spectacular
That's
setting. For
right.
a couple
That's
of those
right.
cocktails,
We're
yeah.
going to be out on this deck sipping these Bohemians, and I am Czech, so I am officially Bohemian myself. So
Wow.
this is just something that has to happen. So
Awesome.
we're ready for reading number 3.
Okay. All right. So this is one of those conversations that I referenced, and it's FDR in the saloon being asked about Churchill.
And this is from book 2.
Yeah, this is from book 2. Yes, yeah, 180 pages 180 to 182. I was a Federalist like my father when I served as a senator from Massachusetts, said John Quincy Adams. Then I was a Democratic Republican as president and a Whig for the last 4 years of my career in the House of Representatives. I believe I managed to disappoint each of them, quite purposefully, of course. I started out as a Democrat, believe it or not, said Ronald Reagan. I'd like to say I didn't leave the Democratic Party, it left me. Winston Churchill switched parties, said FDR, twice as a matter of fact. He left the Tories, the Conservative Party, to join the Liberals, and 20 years later rejoined the Conservatives. I wouldn't recommend it, but it worked for my dear Winston. Were you in fact friends, Mr. President? Asked Obama. Or was it more something born out of necessity? Obama spoke loudly as he was standing behind the seated presidents at the other end of the table opposite FDR. Most of the room heard the question, and it seemed to silence them all as they anticipated his answer. FDR smiled, enjoying the moment. He motioned to Marianne. My dear, I will require another little sippy, pointing at his martini. I first met him in 1918 in London at a dinner for the War Cabinet. I was Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and Winston was in the War Office as Secretary of State for both War and Air. When I mentioned it to him decades later, he had no recollection of it. Of course, I had great fun reminding him of that and brought it up constantly. Yes, we were good friends. We had to be, for the sake of our nations and for the world, but ours was a genuine friendship. We spent 113 days together during the war. We exchanged over 2,000 letters. We had a great working relationship and plotted war strategy and post-war strategy. But we spent time on so many other pursuits. We went hunting and fishing. We drank and we smoked. We frequently went to church with each other. We both enjoyed the hymns immensely. Clinton joined the conversation. There exists today a mythology about Churchill that pervades popular culture as a bit of a drunk, albeit a smart, witty, and eloquent drunk, and a fierce and stubborn and obstinate leader. Do you find that to be true? Ha, FDR laughed. I certainly did, all of it. When we received a telegram in the cabinet room notifying me of his selection as prime minister, I remarked to the others that I suppose Churchill is the best man England has, even if he is drunk half the time. That broke up the room, much to FDR's delight. When he took over in 1940, Churchill and Britain were the very last hope for Europe and indeed the world. And I suspected any prime minister other than Churchill would have acceded to Hitler's wishes. Winston is indeed a heroic figure, and yes, he matches the mythology that you say is attached to him, President Clinton. However, he was wrong about a lot of things, terribly wrong. India, for example, of course, Gallipoli, tragic. And he initially favored an invasion in Central Europe up through the Mediterranean rather than our Normandy invasion. But he got him on board in the end. In fact, he wanted to accompany the boys on the raid on D-Day and watch the landings in person. Who could tell him no? FDR laughed out loud. Eventually, King George declared that if Churchill was going, then damn it, he was going too. Sounds like my kind of fella, declared Teddy Roosevelt. You've got to be kidding, remarked Clinton. No, sir. Churchill only backed down as a means of preventing the king himself from going as well. Churchill felt the same about you, added Truman. He said you, Franklin, were the greatest American friend Britain has ever had. FDR smiled again. I'm not sure that's a long list. He and many others laughed at that, Washington included. But it was great fun to be in the same decade with him.
I love that reading, and I think it really brings out the humanity of these politicians. And I just think if more people could look at the humanity instead of what the press is saying or what you think or what your friends are saying, we'd get closer to what you're hoping for. I'm curious, did you have any presidents? I really admired that you had something positive to say about all of them. Was it harder for some of them?
Yes. No, I tried to, I didn't want to make it when I was looking at the presidents. I wanted to draw upon the best. Mm-hmm. And because this president is, and one of the reasons I did that, this president is pulling from the best of them to try to put into place what he can, to learn from them and to run the nation accordingly. And so I wanted to focus on that. Of course, I could have gone into all of their warts, and there were so many of them. And in some of them, they talk about slavery and I don't dodge some of the issues, but I tried to focus on the positive parts of them that I could, and that was quite purposeful.
Right. I think you did a great job with this. Now, having approximately a minute left to answer, so watch your clock there. I know that one of the things you want with this book is to encourage people to back off from the rhetoric and the anger and the divisiveness. Have you, with your beta readers or with the feedback from any of your readers, do you get the impression that some of them are getting this and maybe acting on it?
Yeah, well, yes. And even more than that, I've done so many book clubs and I interact because with my website, people can contact me and so many do, and they tell me they are sending it to others. In fact, a lawyer at a big legal conference in Chicago contacted us and bought boxes of them to give
fantastic.
to everybody. So if more than anything, they're spreading the word and saying, hey, read this, which is really satisfying. And
That's great.
I couldn't be happier about that.
I need to work this into my marketing strategy, convince people if they read my book, Bannockburn will turn out better.
Exactly.
Right,
Exactly.
yes.
Wait,
It works. It works.
That'll look sterling grid. Okay, wait. You know,
I'm seeing a flaw in my marketing plan.
Right. Oh, it's great. It is great. I love it.
So, where can people find you online?
So it's DanCoonanAuthor.com is my website, and it's got a lot. It's got a lot about the books, but a lot of other things as well. And I update that quite often, and people can contact me there as well. But I'm on Twitter and I have a YouTube site. I do presidential profiles, which are also on my website, by the way. But I have a YouTube site where I place videos where about these presidents. So one on Washington, one on Madison, you name it. I'll eventually in my lifetime, maybe I'll get to all of them. But I love doing it. I love doing that. No, it's been so much fun. It really, and it continues to be. And as you can tell, I love talking about it.
Right. It sounds very interesting. And I might have stumbled across the YouTube, but I'm going to look that up again.
Yeah. So just on YouTube, if you go on YouTube and then just put in Dan Coonan or Presidential Spirits, it'll take you right to it.
And I should spell that for our 7.8 million listeners, Coonan.
Coonan. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, Chris,
And so
where
Laura,
can we find Michael?
booksandbrews.
You forgot Michael. That's not fair. Michael Agnew, our regular co-host, who will be back, is at aperfectpint.net. And he is on the social media, I think a whole bunch of social media as A Perfect Pint. But if he were here, he'd tell you he never uses them anyway. So don't waste your time.
And Laura, how about yourself?
I am at lauravosica.com. We're at, I think, facebook.com/laura.vosica.author for hopefully stuff about trombones and medieval warfare, because they go together like peanut butter.
Yeah, exactly.
See, here's a smart guy.
They go,
knows.
they go together better than peanut butter and jelly.
Right.
Frankly. Yeah.
Trombones, medieval warfare, how to kill people. Oh, I do see the connection.
Yes.
Make them listen
Nothing
to
like a good
trombone.
trebuchet. Right. Yeah.
Right. So, and then Michael and I, you can find us at booksandbrews.net. We are on Facebook at Books and Brews with Laura Vosica and michaelagnew.com. That's Facebook / all of that. We are on Instagram. Not much is going on there until I connect our Facebook to Instagram, which has been on my list of things to do, but I've been busy, keeping the doctors occupied
and stuff,
and making sure their kids can go to college. I'm just that thoughtful. So I think that covers all the links. Do you have any upcoming events?
Oh, and I do have a Dan Coonan author Facebook page.
Okay.
And you can get the books on also on any the Amazon or any of those Barnes and Noble, any of those as well. Let me see. No, the Fairfield Museum here had me a month ago do a lunchtime talk about it, but I have nothing planned right now. But thanks for asking.
All right.
How about our next guest, Laura?
So I say this every month. Every month I mean it, because I'm finding some really interesting authors with really interesting books. Next month we have Ralph Gerrels, and hopefully I am pronouncing his name correctly. He became an author after retirement from a more than 40-year career in marketing and advertising and publishing, much of it in senior executive positions. He writes mostly historical fiction with religious themes. His first book was published in 2017 when he was 75, a great example that you are never too old to start a new chapter in your life. His fifth book, The Essential Last Supper, debuts this month. So I did want to mention his books. One is called Ill-Gotten Gain, which is about a man who finds very mysterious coins, and there is a religious theme to it, which kind of connects.
Right, it does.
His other book, Jesus and Judas, Best Friends Forever. That title caught my attention, as you can imagine.
Wow.
And then one of his books is called Fiery Red Hair, Green Eyes, and a Vicious Irish Temper, the absolute true story of the world's first female pirate, who is known as Anne Bonny. So that should be a very interesting interview, just as yours was, just as Karen's was. So I am just fortunate there are so many interesting authors in the world, or I'd have a boring program.
Well, thanks for profiling them. We appreciate it as well.
Yeah. We've had, and I would encourage people to look back at our prior list. This is episode number 53 of our podcast. We did have other episodes that I don't think can be found anymore at a radio station and at Barnes and Noble, but there are pictures of it on our website, booksandbrews.net. So thank you very much, Dan, for being here.
Great. I enjoyed it very much. Yep. And yeah, I love the setting and the drinks as well.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
I have to ask as an aside, now that we're, I think, officially done.
Well, we're not officially done until we say this has been Books and Brews, episode number 53.
Cheers.
Cheers.